Every year, millions of people visit Pearl Harbor. They walk out over the water on the White Memorial Bridge. They look down through the open floor at the rusting hull of the USS Arizona, still resting on the harbor bottom where she sank on December 7th, 1941. Oil still bleeds from the wreck, slow dark drops rising to the surface, one by one, every single day. People call it the Arizona's Tears. It is one of the most visited war memorials in the United States. But there is another battleship from that morning, one with nearly as many dead, one that also capsized in the attack. And that ship is not at Pearl Harbor. It is not anywhere with a memorial. It is not anywhere marked on a public map. The USS Oklahoma was raised, stripped, and sold for scrap, and then it sank again. Somewhere in the deep Pacific, in water so far down no diver has ever reached it, nearly 430 men remain unaccounted for. The ship meant to bring closure brought something else entirely. When you stand at Pearl Harbor today and look across the water, you are looking at a place where one famous wreck stayed and another disappeared. The Arizona is visible. The Oklahoma is not. That absence is the first strange fact of this story. The Navy raised the Oklahoma in 1943, cleared her from the harbor, stripped the hull, and sold her for $46,000 to a salvage company called Moore Dry Dock in Oakland, California. The plan was to tow her across the Pacific and break her apart for scrap metal. She never arrived. In May 1947, while under tow roughly 540 miles northeast of Oahu, she foundered in a storm and went down a second time. The towing crew was rescued. The ship was not. Her exact resting position has never been publicly confirmed, and no salvage attempt has ever been made. The ship raised to recover the dead had become the reason some of them were never recovered. Before the Oklahoma ever left Pearl Harbor for that final tow, disinterment teams had spent roughly 2 years working inside the raised hull. The conditions were severe. The capsizing had been fast and violent. Salt water had done years of damage, and the remains of hundreds of men were badly commingled, mixed, fragmentary, impossible to separate with the forensic science available in the early 1940s. There were no intact scenes to document. There were no dog tags on most of what they found. Only 35 sets of remains from the Oklahoma were positively identified at the time. Everything else, the unidentified remains of hundreds of men, was interred at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, known as Punch Bowl. Many were buried in group graves, marked as unknown. The Navy then sold the ship. The salvage company accepted the tow contract. Nobody appears to have treated the unresolved remains question as a reason to delay. The Oklahoma left Pearl Harbor a second time, carrying questions it was never designed to hold. To understand how the remains problem became this serious, you have to understand what December 7 actually looked like for the Oklahoma specifically. She was moored on the outboard side of the battleship USS Maryland at Battleship Row, one of the most exposed positions in the harbor. When the first wave of Japanese aircraft arrived just before 8 a.m., the Oklahoma was among the first ships hit. Aerial torpedoes struck her in rapid succession. Estimates place the number at 5 torpedoes in the opening minutes, possibly more. She listed almost immediately. Within approximately 12 minutes, she had capsized completely, rolling onto her side until her masts hit the harbor bottom. Most of the men below decks had no time and no exit. The speed of the capsizing, the darkness, the flooding, and the chaos of the attack meant that hundreds of sailors were trapped almost at once. 32 men were rescued in the days that followed. Cutting teams worked through the inverted hull after rescuers heard men tapping from inside. But 429 men died. The fast capsize was catastrophic for the men. It was also catastrophic for identification. The decision to raise the Oklahoma was not primarily about the dead. The Navy needed the harbor cleared. Battleship Row was a working naval base, and a capsized 27,000-ton hull sitting on the bottom was an obstacle. The salvage effort that began in 1942 was one of the largest and most complicated in American naval history. 21 electric winches, hundreds of steel cables, and roughly 2 years of labor to roll the inverted ship upright and refloat her. When the hull was finally raised and accessible, the disinterment teams worked as carefully as they could. but the conditions inside were not workable by modern standards. Remains had been in salt water for years. The violent capsizing had created chaos that no recovery team in 1943 could fully sort through. The identification rate of 35 confirmed individuals out of 429 dead reflects not a lack of effort, but a genuine forensic impossibility under the methods and technology of the time. The ship was then assessed as too damaged to return to service. The Navy sold her. That decision was administratively logical. It was also the decision that created an unresolvable second problem, because the remains question had not been resolved when the ship changed hands. May 1947. The Oklahoma was under tow from Pearl Harbor toward the California coast. Somewhere in the open Pacific, roughly 540 miles northeast of Oahu, she encountered a storm she could not survive. The hull flooded. She went under. The towing crew was pulled to safety. The wreck was not reported as salvageable. No search was organized. No recovery attempt was mounted. The war was over. The ship had already been sold. The cost of any deep water operation was prohibitive. The exact coordinates of where she sank have never been made fully public. Some records exist within Navy files, but the position has not been released or confirmed in an accessible form, and no modern expedition has publicly located the site. Here is what that depth means in practice. That region of the Pacific sits over water estimated at around 16,000 to 17,000 feet, roughly 3 miles down. That is far beyond the operational range of conventional salvage diving. It is beyond the range of most remotely operated vehicles used for civilian work. It is deep enough that even identifying the wreck location with sonar would require a dedicated, funded, purposeful search operation. No government has proposed one. No agency has funded one. Men whose remains may still be aboard are in a wreck that sits deeper than most of the ocean has ever been explored. In 2015, the Defense Prisoners of War and Missing in Action Accounting Agency began a systematic effort to address what the 1940s had left unresolved. Working at Punchbowl, they began exhuming the group burials and unknowns attributed to the Oklahoma. The tools available now are radically different from anything that existed in 1943. Mitochondrial DNA analysis, forensic anthropology, dental and skeletal comparison, and family reference samples made it possible to identify individuals from fragmentary remains that had been interred for 7 decades. The results were significant. By the early 2020s, more than 100 Oklahoma sailors had been individually identified and returned to their families, men buried as unknowns since the 1940s, now given names again. Some families received notifications more than 75 years after the attack. The DPAA continues working through the remaining cases, but the Punchbowl work has a hard limit. It can only identify men whose remains were recovered from the raised hull before the ship was towed away. Any sailor whose remains went down with the Oklahoma in May 1947, whether because they were missed during disinterment, whether they were in sections of the hull never accessed, or whether the storm itself scattered what had been aboard, those men are beyond the reach of any identification program currently in existence. DNA science can do extraordinary things. It cannot work from 3 miles underwater, in an unlisted location, inside a wreck no one has ever found. There is a legal and institutional dimension to this absence that makes it harder to resolve, not easier. The USS Arizona is a designated war grave under federal protection. No diving is permitted on the wreck without authorization. No material may be removed. The oil still seeping from her fuel tanks is not treated as an environmental problem to be solved. It is treated as part of the memorial itself, a physical trace of the original disaster that the site has chosen to preserve rather than suppress. The USS Oklahoma has none of that. She rests in open ocean in an unconfirmed location, with no memorial designation over her current position. There is no legal framework protecting her second resting place. There is also no funded proposal, no active government program, and no international initiative to find her. The DPAA maintains a public list of Oklahoma personnel still unaccounted for. That list exists. The search for the ship that holds some of them does not. Families of unaccounted for Oklahoma sailors live with a specific kind of absence, not the grief of a marked grave in a known place. Something harder than that, the knowledge that a man may be in the Pacific somewhere, in a wreck nobody is located, in a depth nobody can reach, in water that carries no marker at all. The ship that was moved to resolve the problem became the problem's permanent second chapter. Stand at Pearl Harbor again. The Arizona Memorial is white against the water. Tourists walk across it every day. The oil drops rise. The wreck is visible beneath the surface, and the dead are precisely where they have always been. The Oklahoma is not here. She is not anywhere that can be pointed to on a public map. She is somewhere in dark water 3 miles down, in a position that has never been publicly confirmed, carrying whatever the 1947 storm carried with her. The DPAA identifications continue, slowly, carefully, from the remains that were recovered before the ship left. Each identification closes one name on the list, but the list is not empty. No footage exists of the Oklahoma's second resting place, no sonar image, no dive record, no photograph. There is only the absence, which has now lasted longer than most of the men aboard her were alive. The strange part was never that she sank in 1941. Dozens of ships sank that morning. The strange part is that she sank a second time, and almost no one noticed.